AskReddit. How have you seen a person's life be ruined in a single day? I play poker. I once saw a man on my way in betting about 10k all on one roulette spin. He chose red, and lost. He looked defeated. Later that night, a guy at our table told us that he heard the guy on the phone crying in the parking lot trying to explain to his wife that he lost their money. She was screaming and said she wants a divorce. Gambling addiction is sad. Addicts genuinely believe the next turn will be the winning turn, and so they go all in. They believe that if it had been a winning deal, they'd have been foolish for not going all in and getting that payoff, so they just do it. People who work in hotels and casinos have many stories of people who have lost everything and killed themselves somewhere on property. A friend of mine got busted in a drug raid and was caught with half a minivan's worth of weed. Most people measure their weed in grams. Some in ounces. A few in pounds. Then there's this dude measuring his in minivans. An 18-year-old tried to steal a couple bottles of Hennessy from my store. When I confronted him, he swung the bottle at my head and connected. I rolled with the blow so it didn't do much damage. Charged with assault and robbery by my company. Violent crimes offender and lost custody of his baby. Yeah, at least several times a month we had to take care of a family who learned that their child had cancer that day. Pretty terrible life-altering news. I spent a lot of time distracting kids with board games, coloring while the parents were talking to doctors, crying, and then amazingly pulling it together to continue on. My parents talked about this day for me. I was diagnosed with leukemia when I was between 3 to 4 years old. It was a misdiagnosis, but they said they thought it was a death sentence and it was horrible. Did you live? Rumors are that I loved to this day. Yes, but did you survive? We had extended family together for a holiday and everyone was making jokes about how my cousin was late. His mom and dad were involved in the jokes, texting him being upset about how he was late and all. Turns out, someone hit him in a head-on collision on his way over and he died on impact. The police knocked on the door to notify the family like a fucking movie. I'll never forget watching my aunt crumple to the ground. God fricking damn it. I am so sorry your family had to go through that. I knew a guy who, within the same 24 hours, learned that his wife of 7 years was pregnant with someone else's child. His wife was filing for divorce, and she was going to try to get their house to herself because she was the primary signer on their mortgage because his credit wasn't so hot. That was brutal to see. Fucking A. As a marriage counselor, I often see one confession from a partner absolutely ruin the partner's life, future, self-esteem. It's heartbreaking. Like what? Usually things involving infidelity. It really hits people like a ton of bricks. A kid I went to school with and his sister died in a car crash. They were in the car behind the parents' car driving the older sister to her first year of college. Parents made a turn and no longer saw the kid's car behind them. I would say finding both your kids dead is up there. I was working with a guy, 16, one day when he gets a phone call. His dad, mum, brother and sister had gone to pick up the new family car. His dad took a corner too fast and drove straight into the underside of a bridge. Guy lost his entire family in a split second and the only reason he wasn't in the car too was because he was at work. How fucking fast was he taking the corner? What the hell? When I was about 13 I was talking with my best friend at a playground on a hill. Suddenly this lady comes racing down on her bike. She's not wearing a helmet, which was unfortunate because her bike slipped from underneath her and she goes flying, smacks her head into a corner. I was too young to know this at the time, but I'm almost certain she died instantly. Wear a helmet. Have a friend whose boss got into a gnarly car accident a week ago. Today she was officially told she's paralyzed from the waist down. She was also notified today that her husband died, non-car accident related. I don't know exactly why he passed, but to go from a happy life with your soulmate to not being able to walk and have your life partner is something I can't imagine recovering soon from. I was part of a notification team that told a mother that her 20-year-old son had died. Watching her collapse, I know that her life would never be the same after that. Yup, and I did it. Boss hadn't produced kiddie porn. It disturbed me so much I spoke with a friend who was a desk sergeant the town over and asked what could be done. He passed word along to the chief of the town where it was happening. 2 days later the biggest cop I've ever seen walked through the door of our shop and asked to see everyone's id. Cuffed and stuffed. You should have seen his face when I was summoned to testify at the grand jury hearing. Edit, this whole thing has been sort of cleansing for me. I've never spoken about it to anyone other than my wife, who supported my decision to become a jobless college student with a family and mortgage. Thanks for the honest and kind words. He did it to himself. Thank you for acting on what you found out. One of my friends was playing online with me when I hear a knock on his door through the mic. His parents walk in and decide to tell them that he is adopted and that they are getting a divorce. All in one go. No emotional breaks or anything, and my friend just breaks down over the mic as his parents walk out. I was working in a bank. One day the director fired one of his executives. The whole "empty your desk, you're fired" speech in front of everyone. The director was furious and the guy seemed entirely destroyed. Then he explains to all that this guy gave his login and password to a friend in another branch. The friend used the login and others while doing some kind of credit card fraud. Police arrested her, but lacked evidence against the fired guy. So they just fired him on the spot. Obviously, besides losing his job, he was also blacklisted to work in banks or finance. I mean, he was probably trained to not give that info for this reason. Sharing his logins was almost certainly a breach of the bank's IT and security policies, which is a solid disciplinary case and therefore possible grounds to fire him anyway. That's even without the fraud that went on. This was back in junior high school. Dude sent his nudes to an 8-year-old, him being 12, and the school found out. The cops were involved and they pulled up to the school and he left in handcuffs. It also turned out that same 8-year-old that he sent nudes to, he beat her into a coma. Don't know what happened to him. Obviously he had some sort of assault and child pornography charges, but that's all I know. My elderly father unwittingly married a woman who would abuse him for 4.5 years before we found out. We met her on the day of the wedding. That day sealed his fate. She isolated him from us, coerced him to sell his assets, stripped his bank accounts, heavily drugged him and almost killed him, but we rescued him and he lived with us until he died. Dude, this happened to my grandfather too. She has since moved on to her 5th husband and is living in Florida as there is a warrant out for her arrest in the state of New York. My stepdad's life was ruined the day his son, my brother, died. He couldn't cope with the loss, couldn't comprehend the rest of us were hurting just as bad, and turned even deeper into the alcohol and became even more emotionally abusive. Couple years later, when he forced my mom to choose him or me, I watched her make the hardest decision I've probably ever seen her make. She walked away from her husband, the love of her life. Edit, my mother and I no longer have much of a relationship. She made the right choice for the wrong reason. She has point blank told me she regrets having me. My stepdad is, as far as I know, still drunk off his ass and living alone. My mother is alone and living with regrets. As for me, I'm still healing from the scars but mostly doing okay. Every part of this is heartbreaking. I'm sorry, and I hope you guys all get to a better place. One of the former anesthesiology residents in the program here was in his last CA3 year. He was emergency call, which comes after C1, C2 and C3 and basically never ever calls in, but you have to be available in the event that you do get called in. Most people will sleep with their phone on or go out to the movies or do basically anything within a 30 minutes drive of the hospital. Some crazy car accident happens that night around 2 a.m. and multiple trauma cases are going back into the OR. Our dude fell asleep and his iPhone did some automatic update so he didn't get the call from the hospital immediately. His pager battery also died sometime that evening. He doesn't realize any of this until he's getting ready for work the next day at around 5:45 a.m. and sees his phone blown up. Shows up to work at 6, fired on the spot. Guy was 2 months away from graduation and starting salary of $400,000 a year plus overtime. I had a former colleague who was doing his residency in general surgery. He had just started his 5th and final year of training. One day, in the middle of a surgical case, the police show up at the hospital for him. A tech pulled him out of the OR, and he was arrested right there on the spot in front of everybody, still in most of his surgical attire. He had to do the walk of shame through the entire hospital, in handcuffs and OR scrubs. Turns out his ex-wife had gone to the police claiming that he had molested their children. The children testified to this effect as well. All of us were blown away. This was the sweetest, most cheerful guy ever. Nobody thought him capable of something like this. Sure enough, it came out several months later that the kids' statements were coerced and that his ex-wife falsified the whole thing. It wasn't the first time she had attempted to screw him over, but it was definitely the most successful. Dude's career and life were fucked. There's Crazy X, and then there's straight up Evil X.